There are no doubt a whole bunch of people who raised an eyebrow when I skipped over Jet Li's Fearless. But see, there's more than just one movie like Fearless. There's enough for one final chapter in the series chronicling the cinematic legacy of Bruce Lee's Fists of Fury. And today we're going to look at all the movies based on Chen Zhen's master, Huo Yun Jia. I hope I'm not butchering that. While we've gone over most of the theatrical versions of Chen Zhen's various Fist of Fury movies, the character of Chen's poisoned master is another cultural hero that we've glossed over so far. I kinda did it on purpose, to be honest with you, so that we could focus on Chen Zhen by himself instead of going back and forth between these two guys. I mean, it's two different guys, but their histories are connected. See, Chen Zhen's character is a fiction. It's made up, right? His name was taken from a real student of Huo Yun Jia's, but there's no story behind it. That just happens to be the name of one of his students. Huo Yun Jia himself is a real guy, right? And Huo Yun Jia really did die and might have indeed been poisoned.
Huo Yun Jia was the greatest boxing instructor of all time. He stood for everything that's right. He was our leader. He's gone, the founder of Qingwu School. I met him 40 years ago. We were young, and we grew up together. Even then, as a lad, he always knew he'd start a school here. Yes, he had that kind of vision, and that dream did come true. Our school here was his achievement. He died for us.
Now, we're not going to go over all of these Fist of Fury movies again just because they had Yun Jia in them, but just know that most of them do feature him to some degree. For example, in the last chapter, we covered Fist of Legend 2019, and about a half hour in, there's a moment where he gets a letter from his master, and they make like a couple montages out of it. There's good reason for that.
夺人性命，万事以和为贵。
We've been pretty chronological so far in this series, but I think it makes sense right now to go all the way back to the beginning again. To the title card of Bruce Lee's Fists of Fury, the first piece of information we see, and we'll start our tangent there.
The story begins with the death of Huo Yun Jia, the legendary Chinese hero famous for his victories over Russia's champion wrestler and Japan's Bushido expert. He was poisoned. By whom? For what? It was not known for certain, but there has been speculation. Here we offer the most popular version.
Sometimes called Fok Yung Gap in Cantonese, while Huo Yun Jia is Mandarin, these movies usually tell his life stories. You could think of them as spin-off prequels to the Fist of Fury movies, if you like. Japan hadn't invaded yet, and so the foreign bullies aren't just the Japanese. If you go way back to the 8-Nation Alliance we talked about in Chapter 1, any of these countries on the list are fair games. French, German, but almost always the Russian. Why? Well, because at a time when morale was down and the foreigners were coming into their land and pushing them around and calling them the sick men of Asia and challenging their kung fu, only one man said, "Fuck Yun Gap," because that was his name, and he had to give his name to enter the challenge so that he could wipe the floor with that big Russian wrestler. And he did. He won several fights allegedly, although some say it's been blown out of proportion a bit. But what is real is that he and his business partner, Mr. Nanjin Sun, recognized his newfound popularity, and knowing what it would mean to the people of China, they opened the Qinwu Athletics Association, which is actually very much still around today. The idea was to start to teach people kung fu openly to anyone who wanted to learn, instead of the previous practice, which was much more closed off, secretive, and passed along within families. Promoting strong mind and body and being inclusionary was a key to such a successful patriotic endeavor. Much of these movies end with his death, while most Fist of Fury movies start with his death, and this is because it's dramatic AF. And because he did die pretty young at 42 for a guy that was in such great shape, and because it was widely suspected that he was poisoned. and that's because he did go to a Japanese doctor for medicine and then died. But you'll also notice that part of his story in many films is his weak health as a child, having asthma and whatnot. Then we have the idea that his body is dug up in so many of these films and they found arsenic in his liver. Well, in 1989, in real life, his body was exhumed when they had to move the remains, and they indeed did find the kind of black spots on his remains that would indicate arsenic poisoning. But they actually used arsenic at the time as medicine in those days, so yeah. His death came only months after opening Qinwu, but still the school has lived on till today. This explains why so many of the 70s Bruce Lee clone movies were about trying to keep their schools open after Chen Zhen's death. Alright, let's look at the movies. There are many, and we are again excluding the many TV series and just doing movie formats, otherwise we'd be here for forever. Legend of a Fighter from 1982 was directed by Yuen Woo-ping, of Matrix fame and Kill Bill fame and Crouching Tiger and Kung Fu Hustle and Fist of Legend. I mean, there's something incredibly inventive about Yun's choreography. I wonder what's the secret to their style. Well, this might give you a clue. And unlike the Fist of Fury movies, this isn't just a thinly veiled therapist couch for a nation's bruised ego.
你知不知道我受了多少委屈？我身为霍家子弟，反而学不到功夫。外面的人笑我，欺负我，说我是无能废。你说我还能做什么大事？
I mean, it's not like super blatant. They're just, they're not saying the quiet part out loud or anything.
像你这么没有信心、没有志气，到哪都会被人欺负、被人看不起。在我乡下，有个人从小就给人叫痨病鬼。他比你受了更多的委屈、更多的挫折，但是他凭着信心跟志气。
Okay, fine. That's exactly what it is.
那个人。 就是我。
We know. It was so obvious. And where else are you going to see the famous Kung Fu egg-busting technique? Or egg calligraphy. Eggligraphy. Or Kung Fu going to bed style. Or champagne Kung Fu? This is a severely underrated Kung Fu movie. It hits all the hallmarks of Fist of Fury really successfully. We got the breaking of signs, we got the saving of signs, the sick men of Asia, the Japanese as the enemy, and patriotism and emotional content.
Emotional content.
Now, touted as Jet Li's final martial arts epic, Fearless is directed by Ronnie Yu in 2006. Best known for Freddy vs. Jason and Bride of Chucky and The Bride with White Hair 1 and 2. The choreography is beautiful and the story is sad and redemptive and philosophical about martial arts in a very Bruce Lee kind of way. And there are many moments in Legend of a Fighter that are represented in Fearless, from the beginning of his life as a weak asthmatic child who isn't allowed to practice martial arts even though he desperately wishes to. They also bring up Nanjin Sun, who is his friend that did all the homework for him when he was a child. And then later on, Yun Jia fights all the foreign adversaries for Chinese pride and to disprove the sick men of Asia idea that is brought up again. In Fearless, his childhood is portrayed much younger than in Legend of a Fighter, and his fights are far more complex and acrobatic and varied. However, the production got into some legal trouble when they were sued by the grandson of the real Huo Yun Jia for defamation. See, in the middle of the movie, there's an entirely fabricated part of the story where Yun Jia is so prideful. He's taking on students of very poor character. He's accruing crushing debt. He's losing his real friends, which all comes to a head one night when he gets drunk and accidentally kills his opponent, and then sees his wife and child murdered in retribution. So then he goes off, having lost his mind and everything of value to him, and becoming totally disillusioned, and he finds himself in a village where he's nursed back to health by a blind woman. When he returns to the city and sees that all the fighting amongst themselves, the Chinese people, have weakened them and allowed the foreigners to take advantage of them, he decides to open the Jinwu School for all fighters to unite under. And that's like a pretty big chunk to fabricate of somebody's life that's so historically important. The court ruled against the Yun Jia estate, basically saying, yeah, well, it's fiction and big deal. Though it's still interesting thematically to the movie and certainly gives his character a more dramatic and redemptive arc. But as far as the national pride of the Chinese people, injecting such flaws seems counterintuitive, and I can see why that would be upsetting to his family when none of that is true and the story is basing itself on historical fact. Never mind the fact that they already, with Legend of a Fighter, clearly made a movie where you didn't need to tarnish the guy to teach him a lesson. Still, the movie is highly enjoyable. Of course, there is also a director's cut. Actually, there's a theatrical version, an unrated version, a Thai theatrical version, and a director's cut. The director's cut is probably the biggest deal. It's got an extra 33 minutes of film time and Michelle Yeoh in it, but it's a bit of a mess. We start in modern times in this version at the Olympics Committee, where Michelle Yeoh makes the case for wushu being included as part of the Olympic events. She explains that Huo Yun Jia is a good example for the Chinese people and of sportsmanship. So now the entire story has a different context of a story being told to us, which of course it was already, so I don't know that this really added any extra value, other than Michelle Yeoh, who is always awesome. We then jump into a flashback of a Jet Li, who's a wreck of a man stowing away on a ship, and we see a quick flash to his daughter alluding to the tragedy that befell him. But then we flash back again within our flashback further to when Yun Jia was a child, and now fill in that part of his life. And it all just seems so unnecessary and complicated and is pulling the viewer further away from the story. We're trying to immerse ourselves in the story and the characters, and each one of these little moments is kind of like a reset where you're like, oh, where am I now? And oh, okay, and I'll try and get back into it. There are also, though, some really good additions, like where we see Yun Jia step in and take the punishment for a boy in the village where he's recuperating for stealing somebody's ox. Clearly the village would be endeared to him, and there are nice pacing changes and extra small things that do get added that add a little bit more color to the story. But while I'd like to see some of them return to the film, I think I prefer the unrated edition for the brevity and simplicity that it brings. For a final statement on Kung Fu films for Jet Li, a man who has many impressive chapters in the history of Kung Fu films, this is a pretty good one to end on. Now, an iQIYI discovery, Huo Yun Jia, that's the title, from 2019, is a sprawling historical adventure. I'm pretty sure it sprawls. This movie focuses its lens on Yun Jia meeting his friend and future business partner Nun Jin Sun for the first time and getting hired as his bodyguard so that they can traipse off to the west, I think that's Western Asia though, to buy medicine. I think that's a guise for Jin Sun's revolutionary activities, so we get lots of land pirates and thugs and swindlers. Are land pirates just robbers? There's gotta be a better word, right? Brigands, ne'er-do-wells. Anyway.
假的，一定是假的。对不起，对不起。你看他耍得这么好，
总不像是坏人吧？难道他裤腿里还能藏着刀不成？啊？哎，对不起，对不起。
Earlier, I said that it was a historical adventure because it's not like a crouching tiger, hidden dragon world where people can fly through the treetops. Huo Yun Jia is a real historical figure. However, I don't think that any of this story is based on fact. I mean, I'm not an expert, but I never saw anything about this prequel-style adventure that basically serves to celebrate the meeting of Yun Jia and Nanjing Song. I mean, it's cool and it's fun, but I don't know. So while I don't think it's trying to adhere too closely to the biography of Master Hua, instead, it seems to focus on contextualizing what the times were like during his youth, and the kind of raiding that the Chinese were experiencing from foreigners in the north. He did work for a time with his father as a protective guard for convoys, and he did actually defend some monks, apparently, from some bandits. Bandits! That's the word that I was looking for earlier, not land pirates, but... That's the kernel of truth that this story is embellished from for our enjoyment. But you know, I wouldn't blame you if you thought it was a fantasy. For example, there's a scene where I'm pretty sure this guy thought he was a werewolf and he tried to transform like Hulk out, right? And he thinks he's gonna do it. He's very convincing, and you can see that Yun Jia also thinks this dude might turn into a werewolf. So as you're watching it, you think, yeah, maybe this guy's going to turn into a werewolf. But he doesn't turn into a werewolf because he's not a werewolf. And then the fight just keeps going. You'll see what I mean. Just watch this. And then at the end, Yun Jia just smacks him in the head like Craig did Debo at the end of Friday.
You got knocked the fuck out, man!
你怎么了？姐，不好了。
The choreography is notably less Yun Wu-ping and more Zheng Yimou style, so more operatic and less technical. And it's also a buddy cop kind of movie, right? It's like an odd couple teaming them up, right down to the Riggs and Murtaugh 1, 2, 3, go or 1, 2, 3 and then go conversation.
现在怎么办？我喊1、2、3，咱们就跳。好，1、2、4。到底是1、2、3跳就跳，还是1、2、3就跳？1、2、3跳啊！1、2、3跳，那就是第4下跳。1、2、3、4好。
The best of this movie is in the fun adventure and the buddies and the pirates, and there's a little Indiana Jones vibe to it as well. But where it falls short is the anticlimactic finale with sort of poorly defined, one-dimensional villains, so the backdrop of political revolution doesn't resonate that way, and instead just remains a backdrop to the story. Overall, I liked it, but it'll never be a classic. Fearless Kung Fu King is our second to last movie in this chapter, and our last Huo Yun Jia movie proper. It was released in 2020, and more so than other movies, focuses on the creation of the Jinwu School and why.
眼下时局混乱，霍兄弟，何不报效国家？就凭你这一身本事，定能有所作为。
国家的事，哪是我这一介武夫能掺和的？靠着一身力气，能在金门立住脚就不错了。
此言差也。民强乃安邦之本，国有敌辱，必当自强。如果国人都如霍兄弟这般，那么中华必将振兴，民族必有希望。
没什么大不了，我爹不教，我教。只要有人想学，什么外传不外传的，咱们在金门开一家最大的武馆，来多少教多少。
The movie's alright. It's entertaining for sure. but it's odd to see such a pastiche of elements from better known and better made movies. For example, they put in a very Bruce Lee Game of Death style sort of pagoda fight where he has to progress through each level in a building. There's a section with weapons, and there's a section with a sightless blind master, and then a drunken style standing on upside down bowls, which is really, really cool.
赢了才有资格。
打架是吧？这个我在行。
Despite all the fun and inventive fight scenes and the focus of the creation of the Jinwu school, the other aspect of this movie, which is pretty much unique out of all these movies through this entire series, is this one doesn't make the foreigners the specific antagonists of the film. The encroaching foreign armies and the threat they pose is the entire backdrop, but our villains this time are the holdouts, the Qing Empire loyalists who can't see the future that's right around the corner.
在如此腐朽的朝廷中当奴才，真的那么有意思吗，袁大人？
大言不惭！我大清兵强马壮，万国来朝，何来腐朽之说？
兵强马壮，这洋人都已经打到家门口了。 丧权辱国的条约你们签的还少，是不是要把京城也赔出去了，你们才能知道朝廷已经彻底没救了？
放肆！要想抵御外敌，必先清除内患。就是因为你们这些乱臣贼子，才把我大秦搞得乌烟瘴气。
And then in the last half hour, it just flat out becomes bodyguards and assassins as they try and get their convoys of rickshaws through the city blocks and escort their implied Sun Yat-sen character to safety. This was a largely enjoyable effort. If I was asked to critique it, I would say that it's a bit unfocused. The love story just kind of disappears at a certain point, and you'd think that the movie would be about him fighting all these other schools, but then it becomes this game of death thing, and then it's bodyguards and assassins, and then it's about getting some guy's head in a sack back. And also the timing is a little weird on some of these movies. So this movie is set in 1910, and in the movie it's the death of Huo Yun Jia's father, except that in real life that's the year that the real Huo Yun Jia died, and it's the year that the Fist of Fury movie takes place, which is also the real life date of the start of the Jingwu Athletic Association. So it doesn't really it's strange. And similar to other iQIYI productions, this prequel also ends in a cliffhanger, and these all feel like franchise flags that are being planted. I'm personally not a fan of this style of filmmaking. It feels cheap, but this is the trend. So that's what people are going to do. And finally, I said that that was going to be the last Huo Yun Jia movie. So what is the last movie in this chapter? Well, it is called The Shocking Kung Fu of Huo's from 2018. I'm just going to add this curiosity to the list, but I don't want to spend too much time on it because it doesn't actually belong on this list at all technically. So maybe consider this like a remix. It doesn't have a Huo Yun Jia, as the title suggests, and it doesn't have a Chen Zhen character either, but it does have Huo Yun Shan, who, not unlike Yun Jia, starts his own martial arts school, fights against foreigners from the West and Japan. It takes place in 1911 on the doorstep of revolution, and also features an elder master whose health is failing as he attempts to defend his nation's pride through kung fu. The fights are entertaining, the plots tread familiar, well-worn ground, but the plot is actually its own animal with new characters and scenarios. Again, it's not technically a remake, but a movie that belongs on the same shelf in my personal collection. Plus, it's got a painful, nut-crunching fist of fury in it.
Oh my god! 绝招啊，黑虎掏裆。
Okay, so we did it. That was it. We've covered every legendary fist of this one particular emotion, from Bruce to Jackie to Jet to Donnie Yen and more. I will let you decide what is your favorite, which one you might want to track down and watch. I hope this was an enjoyable watch for you, and if you didn't already know about all of these different versions of one story, I hope I was able to bring you something new. Still think there's a more important Chinese movie than Fist of Fury? Let me know here in the comments. Honestly, this is all in fun. Nobody should be too upset. I'm sure Bruce would have a completely different view of his work. Maybe his favorite would have been his next work that we never got to see, like The Silent Flute. Or maybe he would have seen his expression of being human best personified in Way of the Dragon.
The ideal is unnatural naturalness or natural unnaturalness.
I mean, that's what I'm trying to do with every one of these videos, but it's hard, man.
To express oneself honestly, not lying to oneself. And to express myself honestly, that, my friend, is very hard to do.
See you next time.